Typically, in media, if a long-running franchise has reached its 4th, 5th, 6th entries, they start doing something to differentiate it. A subtitle, or a completely different name in general. Rarely do they just call it whatever Part 6. Occasionally, if your series tells a new story with every entry, it works as an important distinction. But if you're just seeing Part 6 as the title, it implies a lack of ideas, a creative bankruptcy. Yep, we're doing another one of these. It rarely denotes anything good, and serves mostly as a sign that you shouldn't expect anything new or fresh coming down the pipe. Accolade's Test Drive series is a quirky example of the form, since for a few reasons there's several meaningful differences between segments of the series as it proceeds. The first Test Drive was a computer game that dropped all the way back in 1987, so long ago that the game's visuals looked entirely different depending on your specific system, whether you got it on the Commodore 64, the Commodore Amiga, the Atari ST, the Apple II, or just straight DOS. The structure of the game was broken into 5 stages on which you drove a fancy sports car up a winding cliffside road, and you weren't racing opponents so much as simply trying to remain upright and mobile as you dodged traffic and avoided police speed traps, stopping at gas stations between levels. The second game, which was called The Duel, with Test Drive 2 as a subtitle, kept the general structure, but added the ability to race against the clock, or even 1v1 against a computer opponent. Accolade and developer Distinctive Software got into a legal dispute about ownership of the Duel source code, which Distinctive won. So Test Drive 3, subtitled The Passion, was developed in-house at Accolade in 1990. Exclusively released for DOS, it altered the look and structure of the game, with thick polygonal graphics and a wide-open level design that let you go wherever to reach the finish line. The Passion got pretty middling reviews, and other than a random Super Nintendo port of The Duel in 1992, Test Drive became a dormant franchise. In 1997, Accolade was still having financial troubles related to the fallout of Sega's lawsuit against them that we discussed in the Slave Zero episode, and was working to mine their familiar IPs, so they brought back the Test Drive name with 2 new series. One a Jeep series called Test Drive Off-Road, and the other banking on legacy with Test Drive 4. Test Drive 4 maintains the franchise's structure, a lapless race from point A to point B, and adds what I didn't realize until this project is apparently the primary framework of 90s racing games, a timed checkpoint system. The critical response was middling, but thanks to a massive media blitz, Test Drive 4 sold huge numbers, even making PlayStation's Greatest Hits designation, and thus, less than a year later, the nearly identical Test Drive 5 came out in the fall of 1998. It's basically the exact same game as 4, down to the amusingly inexplicable wall-to-wall industrial metal soundtrack. Like, Test Drive 5 has a f***ing pitch shifter song on it, man. Once again, despite middling reviews, they had an even more expensive promotional campaign that led to big sales again. So 10 months later, out popped Test Drive 6. And as that title would imply, it is unequivocally, yep, another one of these. Same structure, same design, same industrial soundtrack. It actually opens with the Fear Factory cover of Gary Numan's Cars, adorably. 6 handles better than 4 or 5, but has these hamburger blob car chassis that inexplicably look a lot worse, despite the Dreamcast's added power. The gameplay is passable and playable, but super generic in a lot of ways, and has very little to really make its case in its favor. It just feels like yet another arcade sports car racing game existing in the shadow of the legacy of games like Cruisin' USA. To try and find something specifically nice to say here, I did like all the different pathways and directional options to arrive at the final destination, something I criticized Speed Devils back on its episode for handling poorly. I also like that the other CPU drivers get into accidents and have incidents with the police up ahead of me, which makes the world feel a little more alive and a little more fair, unlike a lot of these sorts of games, including TD4 and TD5, where CPU players are either simply perfect or just feel not subject to the same whims and pressures of the universe. So this was a refreshing detail. But that only goes so far, and too much of this game feels far too familiar and derivative of games around it. As I talked about on the Tokyo Extreme Racer episode, it takes a lot of innovation to come up with a unique or distinctive racing game, especially in the high-volume release schedule of the late 1990s video game market. And although the propulsive ad campaign moved a lot of units, the Test Drive series has not really endured culturally past the basic brand name, because it was a series that didn't do very much to push the envelope. And as a result, it's a series people kinda remember but tend to have no passion for. Ask somebody in their 20s or 30s or 40s what their favorite Need for Speed game was, and they'll give you a half dozen different answers depending on their age and game structure preference. They might even give you a top 3 off the dome. Ask somebody about Gran Turismo, or Forza, or Burnout, or Midnight Club, and I bet they'll have an answer and a story to tell. But ask someone about their favorite time playing a Test Drive game, and chances are you'll get a blank face and a shrug. Because unless you were playing DOS games during the Reagan administration, chances are you've never grown up with a game in this series that had anything distinctive about it. Test Drive 6? Yep, another one of these. Next time... Man, what is this?